to do it, but maybe there are other ways also to do it better. Any comment? Nothing. Okay. So still we have Abdulmoneim, Dr. Abdulmoneim Alfiky. Thanks, Yahya. Sorry. Thanks, Yahya. So Dr. Abdulmoneim, actually, he's a staff member at Ain Shams University, senior assistant lecturer, received his bachelor in urban planning and design 2001, and his master of science in topic of urban environmental management from Ain Shams University 2008. His professional experience focuses on strategic and regional planning in rural areas of the Egyptian Nile Delta. He actively participated in several campus projects between Ain Shams University and several European universities. His PhD on the effects of urban and rural sprawling on the agricultural lands in the Nile Delta, under joint supervision from Ain Shams University and University of Stuttgart, Germany, and is part of the IUSD course coordination team at Ain Shams University. So, Dr. Abdulmoneim.
Hello.
Share your screen, please.
Yes, just give me a second. Okay, is it clear now?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, good. So we did a research at Ain Shams University on the Nile Delta encroachments and the driving forces affecting them. The idea behind the research was to understand the dynamics behind the change from agricultural land to urban uses, whether it's housing or services or whatever, just changing agricultural land. How does that happen? Why is it happening? And how's it choosing its spatial locations? Trying to understand that, we have to give a little look about what is the situation around the world. Many people don't understand that deltas, estuaries, and coastal regions have the majority of the human population living in them. That's why a lot of people say that with the sea level rise, half of the population of the world is in jeopardy, because half of the population live around those areas, which is the most vulnerable ones. And it is expected that they are going to increase more and more during the next, the remainder of this century, which is basically now being called the urbanization century, as most of the population are switching from rural to urban population. If we look at it from the view of the world, we can see that these dots we have here are the different deltas around the world. Of course, there is a lot of them, and that's because the deltas is considered a favored human habitat. They have high productivity, they have rich biodiversity, and very easy. You can transportation is very easy there, so it is very much preferred to live there. Right now, 60% of the world population live around deltas, while you have to notice that the deltas are actually just 0.5% of the total area of the world. So the concentration there is considerably higher. It's considered at the population density is considered at around 420 inhabitants per kilometer square, which is considered greatly higher than the normal population density around the world, which is the gross is around 60 inhabitants per kilometer square. If you look at Egypt itself, you'd find that Egypt has around 60% of its population living in rural areas, And if we consider the Nile Valley and Delta, we're living around something like 7% of the area of the entirety of Egypt, with a population density of the gross population density around 1,200, which is basically more than double or close to triple the population density in normal deltas around the world. We have one of the highest densities in the world. At the same time, we are consuming the agricultural land in the valley and delta at a very high rate. It is considered that we have, or estimated that we have consumed something like 1.8 million faddans from 1952 to 2017. If we look at the delta itself, we can find that the delta is, just a second. The delta itself is, this is an image from the International Space Station, and you can see the delta at night, where basically a network of lights showing the urban fabric that basically bisects the delta everywhere. You can watch where the light intensifies and identify cities and bigger towns and so on. Of course, such fragmentation of the fabric has very much negative effects on the delta itself, as it affects agricultural production costs, since we are dealing with smaller and smaller farms. There is inefficiency in our agriculture or irrigation system. We all know that now in Egypt we have a water scarcity issue, but even with that system, we are estimating around 20% water loss due to the inefficiency of the system, just because, just due to the dense fabric of urban fabric. At the same time, that also represents the presence of this urban fabric, which has a kind of low connectivity to basic surfaces, means that a lot of pollution is being dumped into the delta itself, whether it's in the Nile water or in its lands as well. The delta we're talking about here, or the one we chose to take in the study, we're talking about the geographically recognized delta, and it's also the one recognized by the Ministry of Agriculture and by the Ministry of Irrigation and Water Resources. This means that it's considerably bigger than the deltas that were presented earlier. We're not only talking about the region of delta, which is recognized by the GOBB, which is basically right now in the agriculture, in the Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Irrigation, is known as the Middle Delta, but it also includes the West and East Delta regions as well. It basically extends 160 kilometers from north to south and 240 kilometers from east to west, and it covers around 9 governorates, not the entire area of the 9 governorates, but big parts of them, especially when we talk about Bahira and Alexandria. We have just, in Alexandria, we have just small areas at the south of Alexandria that is part of the delta, and in Bahira we have the areas directly adjacent to the Nile. The other areas are considered reclamation areas and are not the part of the delta. The delta houses around half the population of Egypt, and around 65% of them live in rural area. And the population, the gross population density around the entire delta is at 2,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. Now you see it's basically double the gross population of Egypt, and 4 times no, 4 times, 8 times, sorry, 8 times the gross population in other deltas around the world. So it's considered to have a very high population density. If we look, when we are trying to do this study, we had to give a good background check on all the features of the delta, whether they have to do with agriculture or they have to do with the human habitat. Of course, irrigation is one of the main subjects when you talk about agriculture. The delta itself has many waterworks and many waterways that have been in construction since the 1800s till the early 1900s. And you can consider that we have full control of all water flow inside the Nile Delta. That also includes the drainage systems, which we also have full control of it. So basically, every drop of water that comes into the delta or goes out of it is under our complete control. That doesn't mean, of course, that there is no waste. Just in 2010, it is considered that we have lost, due to the inefficiency of the network, something around 13 billion cubic meters, just in half of that just in the delta, which is a huge amount considering that our water budget in Egypt is around 70 cubic meter from renewable and non-renewable sources. We're also very dependent because the delta has a special propensity to seawater intrusion and soil salinity. We have to use a lot of systems, subsurface drainage in the infield, so that we can control to some extent the soil salinity. At the same time, we don't have enough water for the irrigation of our land, so we have to reuse the drainage water under certain conditions to push it back into the main canals, from the drains to the main canals, so that we can irrigate downstream fields. On the other side, if we look at the holdings situation in the Nile Delta, here we have a study from 1952 till 2010. The study basically we try to understand what happened to the holdings. Why is agriculture right now? We're saying agriculture is not profitable. The situation can trace back to 1952 and the Agrarian Reform Act. Before 1952 and in the era of the Muhammad Ali family, a lot of big projects were done in the Nile Delta and the Valley to develop agriculture to a great extent. Unfortunately, while those projects were very good for the agriculture in Egypt, it wasn't very good for peasants. They were not, up until the World War I, up until the end of World War I, peasants were not actually paid wages. They were given a small piece of land where they can grow their own food, and that's it. Even after World War I, when they started giving them wages, the wages were not that much, and there were no rights whatsoever for them. Not to mention the history of corvée labor, sokhra, and such things, where a lot of people died just digging the canals, even inside the delta, not just Suez Canal, but canals in the delta and the valley. So there was a lot of bad history in this area. And so when 1952 revolution came, there was this socialist movement, and the reform decided, okay, we're going to take a lot of land from the people, so from those who owned it. So anything higher than 200 faddan will not show anymore after that, and that's the limit, and all the land that will be taken from the owners will be redistributed to all the peasants on a system of something like 2 to 5 fadans. So basically, in 1952, the Reform Row created something that we call is ownership fragmentation. We directly fragmented the land into very small holdings, which cannot be economically effective. So if you own something like 2 or 5 fadan, you have a family of 10, you can't expect to run this farm economically. This is a very small holding, and when you run it for subsistence. So basically, you're still planting your own food, and that's it. The idea that you can run it commercially and get profits every agriculture cycle is not really feasible. Fast forward from 52 into the 60s, where a lot of laws were introduced to control the rent of agricultural land, control the rent of housing, nationalization laws, where a lot of public companies or private companies were turned into public entities of the state. This has switched. Created let's say, something like an earthquake effect in the real estate market. Due to rent control, real estate developers stopped building housing to rent, and started building housing to sell it. And of course, there was no mortgage at that time. They were just selling the houses to whoever can afford. Of course, it didn't start like this. It took several stages where you have to pay something like a big deposit, something like a year rent in advance, and then the government cracked down on them, and they had to pay something under the table, and the government cracked down on them again. And so by the end, in the early 70s, they just dropped everything. And if you want to get an apartment or a house, you pay in full. And since, of course, there were no mortgage market in the banks, so you have to pay in full. Yeah, you can't even make installments or something like that. At the same time, in the agricultural land, you have this very small holdings that cannot work into or cannot support a family. Basically, they started the two situations offered a solution to them. I want a house. I'm living in a village or living in a city close to a village, and I want a new house because I'm starting my life or something like that. I'm getting married. And where I'm going to find cheap housing, you can find cheap housing in villages. They can simply sell you a small plot of land, agricultural land. Selling it would give them considerable amount of money as compared to what they would get from normal agriculture, and you build your own house and you live in it. And that's how basically it started. And when you look at it, you find that there was actually no laws against that until the late 70s. There were actually no laws against that. It wasn't actually perceived by anyone that people will sell agricultural land to be built upon to solve the situation for housing and, of course, for the low economic viability. In the late 70s, the government discovered, we're losing a lot of land, and so they started adding punitive laws, criminalizing that switching of agricultural land into urban uses. It didn't work well, so they in '84 they added a complete section in the agricultural law as a punitive measure, and it didn't work again. They started adding, as you go, every 3-5 years they would add new punitive measures and so on, and it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And when you look at the table, you find that from one instance to the other, the holdings become smaller and smaller. We started at holdings that could reach 2,000 faddans, and now holdings beyond 50 faddans are very limited in Egypt, unless of course, you're talking about a company in the reclaiming deserts. But in the Delta, you won't find a lot of properties that are beyond the 50 faddans. At the same time, if you try to look, this is how the Delta looks if we're just looking at agriculture, but this is how it looks when we put all the urban networks in the mix. This is how, if we try to look at the urban fabric inside the Delta, whether it's rural or urban, just the settlements, the fabric itself, we have buildings that are 3 to 5 stories high. Buildings are not well maintained. None of them have painted facades. No one cares about the sanitary situation of the buildings. They don't have good ventilation or good sunlight. Roads are very narrow. Almost 86% of all villages have drains or canals passing through them. And we're talking about villages and cities in the Delta and the Valley. 86.7% have drains and canals moving through them. The majority of them, those villages and canals don't have sewage systems, and the ones that have are something like 6%. So it's very, 22% are the ones who have sewage systems inside of them. The rest of the sewage just dump their sewage and also the solid waste, because there are no solid waste collection systems that work in them. Of course, if we talk about basic services in the Delta are very much in deficit. We're talking about school, cultural centers, sports. Everything is there are no village that actually does. All that factors into how the agricultural land productivity is or looks like. The graph here basically represents the productivity of agricultural land. These are the municipalities of agricultural land of the Delta. There are 84 municipalities in the Delta, Marrakech, and those municipalities. These are the productivity grades of the soil in them. The black marker here is basically the productivity grade in 81, 85. It's calculated on a 5-year basis. And you can see that this 81, 85 is the highest productivity grade as compared to all subsequent productivity grades. You have to look at it that we are doing a lot of effort, or the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Irrigation are doing a lot of effort to increase productivity of agricultural land. They do a lot to combat seawater intrusion, to control soil salinity. The Ministry of Agriculture all the time is introducing new types and new strains of crops that have higher yields. They introduce new techniques for intensified productivity. And yet, when you look at all those measures, we find that agriculture is always dropping down. Of course, part of that is due to the ownership fragmentation, creating farms that are very small, that no one is actually using those techniques. They are just, it's not worth it. They do cost money to implement, and so they don't use all those techniques. On the other hand, all the pollution that is being dropped into the land and the canals and the drains is basically affecting the quality of the soil and consequently affecting the level of the productivity of the soil as well. Now, after this quick overview about how it looks like the Nile Delta, we started looking into the gross of the encroachments in the delta itself. I think this is a mistake. This should be the first one. Basically, we ran a change detection analysis using Landsat satellite imagery from 1984 till 2018. We had several snapshots from satellite images and ran the analysis about how in those of the data we have it from 84, 90 to 2018, and when you look at it, you find that the rate of yearly growth, we consider that. Okay. When we consider the factors that the socio-economic factors and the legislative factors those 10 decades, we find that they have some correlation with how the growth rates, for example, in 5-6 years, where we were working on the strategic planning phase of strategic by the GOP. In that phase, when we were working, there was a lot of growth in anticipation and a lot of maybe corruption in the government. They just turned a blind eye to people building because, okay, it will be part of the urban fabric anyhow, or maybe it will be because they didn't know. Between 2010 and 2018, maybe it's a little less, but this is understandable. Between 2011 and 2014, the growth is not as high as people expected it. I remember when the revolution in 2011 happened, a lot of people said, "Oh, there is no order in Egypt right now, and a lot of people is encroaching on agricultural land." But it wasn't as bad as we thought. And actually, in 2011 to 2014, a lot of those urban boundaries that we are all talking about have been certified in those 4 years. So basically, when we certified them, we basically added a lot of agricultural land to the urban fabric as urban land that could be developed, and they were developed quite fast. So basically, you can consider that from 2010 to 2018, the growth was actually legal growth. It wasn't informal, it wasn't illegal. Those encroachments were legally sanctioned by the government. And when you look at it from another perspective, the land that was consumed from 83 to 2017 based on official records is around 400,000 fadans. 41% of that is legal expansion of cities and villages. That's all across Egypt, of course, not just the Delta. If we take a look at how the gross looks like, this is Banha and a number of villages around it. You can look how it developed through the years from 84 to 2018 and have different types of development. In some areas, it's just filling the gaps between it and then growing across the roads or on waterways. Some villages simply just go to, basically they are trying to create a bigger conglomerate, so a bigger mass. They're aggregating together until they reach to become one big mass, something like this, and now it's this, or this, where we had a small village, a very small village here and a medium one here, and then in 2018, basically they are one big mass. Most of the grass, when you look at it, is very odd because they are growing on waterways, they are growing on train networks, on train tracks, or alongside the train tracks, or alongside main roads. Now, it's a bit bizarre because you think these are, most of that growth is illegal growth. And so you expect that those places, when you talk about main waterways or main roads or train tracks, that those are places that have a high level of scrutiny. So you can't understand how did they actually do that? How did the gross work like this when it should have been under great level of monitoring? This here was done to show where the concentration of the gross through the years look like. Mostly in Alexandria, Beheira, Dahliya, Shar'iyya, those have the highest growth rates, urban growth rates across the delta. But if you look at it through the years, you'd find that it varies from one time period to another. And we speculated that this variation, that from one time period to another, the concentration shifts, is basically when, for example, here, in those 10 years when Beheira was the main subject of urban growth, maybe it had something like a higher level of scrutiny. You have lost a lot of land, so a higher level of scrutiny was in those areas. But when you look at it in the next 10 years, Dahliya and Shar'iyya have higher ones. Basically, it's some form of an opportunistic market. The real estate developers look where the government is not really on high alert for urban encroachments, and go there for a period of time until shifting to another place or something like that. At the same time, when you look at the graphs from 48 to 2010, the white here is actually the waterway networks, whether it's canals or drainage. And we can see that from 48 to 2018, all the red dots here, this actually represents the encroachments that are very close to our intersecting with the waterway system, and it has grown by 344%. You can consider this as added pollution, because with the growth of those cities or those settlements, villages or cities, they don't have adequate sewage system, they don't have waste disposal, solid waste disposal systems, and where do those all end? They end in the waterways. So with the further expansion of those settlements, the further encroachment on agricultural land, the increase on pollution that they drop in the delta as a whole. Now, to understand the how the growth happened, how it was located, we used a logistic regression model. We built a specific model for that. The model is basically, the idea of the model is basically simple. B here is the dependent variable that we're looking at it in a regression model, and it is it's a binary variable. It's either 1 or 0, where 1 is an encroachment and 0 is not. And the rest of the equation basically does something that looks for variables that we call our driving forces. These are the driving forces by which we will choose which land plot to grow on. If we look at it, there are 17 here, 17 driving forces. It ranges from population density, agricultural productivity, urban density, proximity to the Nile or proximity to waterways, or to regional roads and secondary roads, or to industrial areas or major cities. Of course, some of those represent a socioeconomic variable when you talk about population density or agricultural productivity or proximity to industrial areas. Those are socioeconomic variables. The rest are considered the proximity to waterways or proximity to regional roads as proximity to transportation systems, and so they are looked at as a form of an administrative variables. We had 17 variables in total run into this algorithm, and the aim was to find out which variables matter most when we choose, or when it was chosen to encroach on this piece of land instead of another piece of land. When we run the model, we get a result like this. The model was in ArcGIS, and then we take its results into SPSS to run the logistic regression. This is the final results that we get from it, and by reading those numbers, interpreting those numbers through the different intervals, we can see how the patterns change. And just looking at it through the different variables, we find that population density, for example, has just moderate effect when it attracts grass. It is not the main item. Agricultural productivity does affect it, where areas that have high agricultural productivity are not turned into urban areas. Areas with lower agricultural productivity are being chosen. But at the same time, we confirm what we visually seen before, that growth is choosing prime lands that are adjacent to waterways or adjacent to main roads or in close proximity to a town or a big city. And this is basically what we confirmed it like this, and we were looking at why this happened. Because basically, when you look at it, these are places that are under very high scrutiny from the government, whether it's centralized government or the local government. So they shouldn't allow it. We found out that a lot of places or a lot of cases like this were due to, first of all, loopholes. People found loopholes in the laws in the different years. I mean, the law itself has been developed from the 70s until now. They are always developing the law, trying to combat the idea of people turning their land, and you have to know this is their land. They are building on their own land. So turning the land from agriculture to urban areas, but people are always finding loopholes towards it. On the other side, there's also corruption. Some corruption is political in nature, where basically in the let's say it's 2005, the parliament election is in a few months, and basically, if you stop people building their own houses, they will not vote for you, and you are the representative of the government. You are from the national party, and so basically the local authorities and the central authorities will turn a blind eye, let you build whatever you want to build, and then maybe after the election, they come and make fines for you or something like that, because they can't actually throw you out of a house that you have already a resident of. If you're living inside it, they can't throw you out, and they can't demolish the house. So the house is there, or they use a loophole in the administrative system. We take too many vacations, and some of them are quite long. So, for example, in the Big Feast, and the vacation is almost a week. The administration segment starts taking their vacation for a week, and at the same time, you start building your own land. So in 1 week you can just make the foundations for the house and make the first floor. And if you're really daring, you can actually start even on the second floor while using heavy structural elements شدات جامدة شوية. And so when they come after a week of vacation, they find that the house is already there. And they can't do anything. It's already built, and if they want to demolish it, it has to be empty. No one is can be a resident of it. Of course, those when we look at it in this light, it's also apparent that the solution of the government is mostly about symptoms. They only make punitive measures, even when they had those programs like Shuru or like the strategic planning initiatives for all the villages and all the cities. They didn't tackle the main issue. And the main issue here, we have two main issues here. One of them is the fragmentation of the ownership, which leads to farms that have no economic viability at all and are mostly dependent on subsistence agriculture, which has no profitability. And on the other side, you have a very great pressure of housing needs for the people. Because when you look at it, the Delta has actually half the population of Egypt, and they are always growing, and they are not going anywhere. They're still in the Delta. Now, with those two problems, if you're not solving them, whatever legislation you're going to take will not do anything. There will always be loopholes in whatever law you make, and people will know how to exploit them with time. The major idea that should be looked upon is having policies for consolidating the land. The idea that we have to consolidate farms, creating bigger farms that can use better technologies and that can, let's say, invest into industrial agriculture. I mean, agriculture that is running right now, profitable agriculture that is running right now across the world is basically industrial agriculture. You are using very sophisticated machinery, very high-end agricultural techniques, and top-level crop varieties. If you're not using all three, you are not profiting. And of course, to use that, you need large plots of farms. A farm that is less than 5 faddans or maybe 10 faddans is not profitable enough. You have to use large farms. So consolidating of farms is needed. Of course, that requires a change in policy, a lot of incentives, a lot of advertisement between landowners, so that they could, you can convince them that they have to start consolidating their ownerships with nearby landowners to create bigger farms that can be profitable for all of them. At the same time, the idea that we say, oh, we can find housing, you can't find housing because there is a great pressure on due to the high population density that we have. And it's a population density that maybe, or not maybe, it's certainly have nothing to do with agriculture. Basically, right now, only 30-something% work in agriculture. There are some villages that actually have no one working in the agriculture field at all, which, I mean, defies the logic of being a village. Not just because the village is big or small, it has no one working in agriculture. This is not a village anymore. And yet those people still live in those villages. And if you want them to move outside the Delta, basically we have to think of it as they are migrating outside the Delta. And if you're migrating, you're not just buying a house somewhere else, you're moving your entire livelihood to some other place. And this is also should be a major change in our policies. Just moving people to, just encouraging people to buy housing in new settlements is not enough. You have to create, or we have to create a system by which people can migrate from one area to the next and move their entire livelihood to this new settlement, wherever it is. But if something like this is possible, people can start moving outside of the Delta, considering that a lot of them actually don't work in agriculture. They don't need to be in the Delta. They have no, if we think of the agriculture as of the Delta as an agricultural hub, they have no value being in the Delta. They add no value to that agricultural hub. So moving outside of it and contributing the value of their knowledge and work to another place is mostly preferable. But they don't have that as an availability. So what you have is people buying houses maybe outside the Delta, but they still work in the Delta. So they are making long commutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, maybe more between the Delta and wherever they are living now. Or maybe it's the reverse. They are still living in the Delta, but they are working someplace outside it or on its edge. So they're always moving back and forth, which is basically a great waste of resources for the individuals and for the country itself as a whole. As a final thing, I think it was when we talked with Moishi, when I talked with Moishi, when we talked about the workshop, there was something about what needed to be added in our curriculums as planners. I think when we look at it, and maybe I'm looking at it from the perspective of using tools for planning. Of course, any of us use GIS. GIS now has become a very mainstream tool. Maybe 10 years ago it wasn't. Now it's a mainstream tool. Everyone is using it. You're not a planner if you don't use GIS tools, but I think we also need to start using more tools. We need, a lot of us needs to start using remote sensing tools if we're going to run change detection analysis on any area or location, or if you're starting to study how it changes and why. We have to start using a lot more statistics. The idea that you look at a lot of theses and a lot of papers, and you find that it is basically qualitative research with no quantitative factors in it. This can't continue. A lot of our decisions has to be based not just on logic, but also on hard data, using things as regression, cluster analysis, factor analysis, and so on, or running tests like a t-test or a kappa test or an I-index or something like that. They are very useful for us to identify if even the most basic analysis that we're running is valid or not, and we need that in our data. At the same time, we have to use maybe landscape metrics. Right now, there are metrics, for example, that can identify informal areas. I can have a big regional map and run landscape metrics, specific landscape metrics that can identify informal areas just from the map, just from running it on the schematics of the map. It can identify for me informal areas. I can quite accurately identify the locations, the areas, and then proceed with more studies. The same with environmental indices. The idea that we can run simulations for urban environment, for heat islands, and so on is very, very important to what we're doing right now. At the same time, because our science is between hard sciences and social sciences as urban planners or as regional planners, we're between hard sciences and social sciences. We can't ignore that social sciences have made a lot of advancement in qualitative investigation tools. There are many tools by which we can create, for example, interviews and questionnaires. it's not a haphazard thing. I mean, a lot of people, you just find them, oh, we made this questionnaire for this topic, and when you look at the questionnaire, you ask, what method did you use, how are you going to run the analysis, and so on, and you find that it's haphazardly made. It didn't follow any scientific knowledge, which is not actually the right way. You have to have the right tools, the right techniques. You have to know how you're going to build your questionnaires, or how you're going to build your interviews, and how you're going to analyze them. Because right now, even those interviews and questionnaires are analyzed quantitatively as well. So we have to also learn that it's one of the tools that should be in our bag as planners. And that's it. And thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Menem, for your contribution, which also shows long years of experience in the field of data analysis for the Delta, and concluding and reaching some findings that definitely should help many other researchers, in addition to the decision makers, when it comes to planning in Delta. And thanks also for the last part contribution, which is what skills need to be learned. And I think this can also help us a lot to reach this kind of conclusion at the end. Unfortunately, I have to leave right now. I have a defense that already started 5 minutes ago. So I'm sorry. Mukhtar will be moderating now. Minna, Mukhtar also will be introducing you. So yeah, and everything is recorded. So no worries. I can attend the presentation alone by myself later. So thanks a lot, and yeah, see you all tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Thanks, Manan, for your presentation. So before we move on to the next presentation, so if anyone has a question for Manan, and if you want to share their opinion about the presentation, so please raise your hand. Nagla wrote on the chat, can we contact you for some discussions? Manan, if you are open.
Yeah, certainly. I think Hassan has my email, so can share my email and we can talk about it.
Okay, perfect. So is there any other questions? So I think we can move towards the next presentation. Thanks, Manan.
Certainly.